Thank you.
All right, thank y'all for being here today. I'm so excited to have you. How was lunch? Come on, how was lunch? It was really good. Thank you, Mikhail. So as Mikhail said, I'm Elizabeth Anderson. I'm CEO and co-founder of Lunar Lab. We're a UX design and product strategy company based here in Birmingham, and we help people design beautiful, inclusive, and innovative software. So like Mikhail mentioned, I've also done a lot of project management. So huge portion of my tech career has been in project management, but also people management as a senior leader. So today, we're going to talk about empathetic leadership, how empathy can make your team more successful, more productive, and happier. We're also going to talk about some actionable steps that you can take as a leader to sharpen your empathy skills so your team can benefit. All right, so what I want to start with today is a story about a guy from about 100 years ago who was a really fantastic empathetic leader. Ernest Shackleton was a popular guy in leadership circles, but I hadn't really spent a whole lot of time thinking about him until a few years ago when someone really close to me recommended a book about his Antarctic expedition in 1914. And so I have to admit that this took me a while to get excited about. It was not my usual cup of tea, so I kind of begrudgingly picked up this book about him, and then I did not put it down until I finished it. I was totally hooked. So here's what happened. I'm going to tell you about his story. So Shackleton puts together a crew to explore the Antarctic in 1914. Unfortunately, just a few months into the expedition, their ship, the Endurance, becomes frozen in the ice. So they pretty quickly figure out that they're not going to be able to move their ship until spring, at least. Now, this is January, but they're in the southern hemisphere. So spring isn't coming until September. So for months, they're stuck on the ship in the middle of the Weddell Sea in the Antarctic. And if we thought that we had cabin fever during pandemic quarantines, these guys did not have Netflix or Twitter. They had a hand-cranked phonograph, but they could only use it 1 hour a week because they didn't have enough needles for it. So spring rolls around in September and the ice starts breaking up. Great, right? Absolutely not. These huge chunks of ice start putting pressure on the ship. So this water is just pouring in. Every night for 2 months, the crew is going to bed, listening to the ship creak all around them, hoping that it won't break apart. Well, that's exactly what happened in November. The crew has to abandon ship really quickly. They're just grabbing whatever they can, and the Endurance sinks to the bottom of the sea. Well, now what? They're just out here stuck on the ice with whatever they could grab. They're all together on this huge ice floe, and they're just drifting around at the whim of the sea. So they try to march across the ice to this island nearby where they know that there are some supplies cached, but the ice is totally impassable. So they set up camp on this ice floe. Well, after months and months and months, one night, the ice floe breaks apart right in the dead of the night while they're all sleeping, and it goes right through the middle of camp. So they all jump up out of bed and they're scrambling, but they get everybody back together, but they're kind of freaked out about camping on ice floes at this point, right? This doesn't sound fun. So they load up whatever they can, and they've got a few lifeboats that they saved, and they sail for 5 days to Elephant Island. So they make it to the island, and this is the first time that they've touched solid ground in almost 500 days. So Elephant Island, it's not like Disney World, right? This is nowhere near any major shipping routes. No one is coming to save them. It's not like they can just pick up their cell phone and call for help. They're in the middle of nowhere. Their supplies are dwindling. They're subsisting on meals of seal blubber soup and penguin meat for months. They go through periods where the seal hunting doesn't pan out, and they have to eat their dogs. They're cold. They've got frostbite and gangrene. Everything is soaking wet all of the time. They're all living together in this cramped little hut that they made out of lifeboats, but it's winter in Antarctica, and this is not warm and cozy. The average temperature is way below zero, and the only insulation that they've got is each other. So realizing that there's no hope of rescue, Shackleton, their leader, does the only thing he can. He decides to get in an open boat and sail 720 miles to a whaling station in South Georgia, as one does. So Shackleton picks 5 men to go with him, but only after really, really carefully considering these men's value for the job and the risk to morale. One of the men begs to go, even though they're only taking 4 weeks of food, because if they don't make it, it's over. So they get in this tiny little 20-foot lifeboat and set sail for weeks in the dead of winter in Antarctica. They're sailing across some of the roughest water in the world in an open boat with only primitive navigation equipment to help them find this tiny little speck of an island. They can only chart their course every couple of days. Their maps get washed away. Everything on the boat is soaked. Their reindeer sleeping bags rot and they get slimy, and they have to sleep in them anyway. They have to, they're going across this, their gloves are getting blown off by the wind, and during all of this, there is a hurricane. So somehow, they make it to South Georgia, but the hurricane's blown them off course. They land on the wrong side of the island. They hike for days across this completely inhospitable, mountainous island with nothing but 50 feet of rope between them and screws pushed into their boots so that they can climb better. Unbelievably, they make it to the whaling station, and they're able to send a crew back to rescue the men on Elephant Island. Every man on this expedition lives and goes home. And a few years later, Shackleton decides he wants to do it again. He wants to go back to the Antarctic. Who's signing up? Some of these guys did not even get paid for the last trip. You think they signed up to go again? They did. They did sign up. A bunch of them signed up. They wanted to follow their old boss. So, I thought this story was pretty incredible. And what really impressed me about this, the thing that wowed me, was that through all of this, Shackleton was this really caring and empathetic leader. He didn't make the best decision every single time, and he wasn't perfect, but he kept his empathy and he took leadership really seriously. His men wanted to follow him. He didn't have to force them. His leadership style was pretty unique for the time period, and a lot of people considered him to be eccentric. I'd probably even argue that he was unique by today's standards. So even when he was interviewing for the expedition, he believed that character was just as important as technical ability. He accepted everyone's unique abilities and quirks of personality. Long before the days of corporate birthday parties, he believed in recognizing people as individuals. So he celebrated their birthdays, and he held big team celebrations when they had big wins. He really got to know everybody as a person, and he cared about each and every one of them. He socialized with the team after dinner. He sang songs with them, and he played games with them, and he knew the value of camaraderie and teamwork. He also loosened up some of the hierarchy, so he made sure that chores were evenly distributed among everyone, himself included, no matter what your rank was. Nobody was more important than anyone else. But at the same time, one of his men wrote, he never expects one to do more than he's capable of. He cared so much that at one point, one of the men lost his gloves. So Shackleton gave him his own. Without his mittens, he got frostbite. Even when it was life and death, he made all of his decisions based on understanding each person and keeping morale high. Even when they were facing almost certain death, the crew kept going because they knew that their leader had their back and he was going to do everything in his power to keep them alive. So, building high-performing teams with empathetic leadership. One of the really great things about our field in tech is that we emphasize upskilling. We're all here today at this conference because we want to develop our skills. And we're always innovating and learning new things. We're always getting better about what we do. And I love that about tech. But we spend so much time on technical skills that sometimes we forget to spend time improving other skills that are just as important, like empathy. Empathy doesn't get as many exciting headlines as machine learning or NFTs or cryptocurrency. As tech workers, we sometimes think that we just work with computers. And yeah, that's true. We do spend a lot of time staring at our computers. We spend a lot of time begging them to just please create this build without errors. But the truth is that tech is really about working with people. We're humans who are creating all the software. And we're creating it with other humans. And we're creating it for other humans. So if we want to create and innovate and achieve, we've got to be able to connect with and understand people. We need empathy. So empathy is defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of other people. It's not the same as sympathy, where we feel sorry for someone. Sympathy is about feeling our own perspectives. When we're feeling sympathetic, we might say, oh, poor you, I'm so sorry that happened. But we're just a little bit disconnected. Empathy is something deeper. Empathy is where we actually identify with another person and feel what they're feeling. We put ourselves in their shoes. We understand why they feel the way they do. With empathy, we can get in touch with what people really mean and who they really are. And I actually think that empathy is one of the most important skills that we can learn in tech. And it really is a skill. You can practice it, you can learn it, just like learning a new programming language. If you practice it enough and you get great at it, you'll become a great leader. So I want to take a minute to talk about soft skills, so-called soft skills. I hate that term. It sounds so fluffy. Right? When people say soft skills, we hear the word soft, and we think that it's the opposite of hard skills like technical knowledge. And these hard driving, numbers-focused people sometimes say, well, I don't care about soft skills, I want results. Well, I'm going to tell you that you're not going to get results without the soft skills. So do not take my word for this. Take it from the US Army. The Army actually invented the term soft skills. They meant to deal with any skills that don't involve dealing with machinery. So since the 1960s, the military realized that they couldn't motivate soldiers or win wars if they didn't have empathy and leadership skills. So today, they spend a huge amount of money training people on how to be empathetic and training them to be good leaders. And businesses also caught on to the fact that so-called soft skills have a huge impact on team performance. The last 70 years or so, business management theory has focused on how you can learn leadership skills, and they've drawn the conclusion that in order to be a good leader, you can't just focus on numbers and production to the exclusion of everything else. In order to get those good numbers and get that high production, you've got to focus on people. And that's come in a lot of different flavors. So you can read about 1 million different books about effective leadership, but most of them are going to draw the same conclusion, that you cannot get results without dealing with people. And isn't that what leadership really is? So to understand empathetic leadership a little bit deeper, I want to start with what a leader is. To start, I want everyone here to totally forget the idea that being a leader means that someone has direct reports or that they have the words manager or supervisor or lead or senior in their job title. You do not need a single direct report to be a leader. I spent a huge chunk of my career as a project manager, and as y'all know, people do not report to the project manager. But a good project manager, the ones that actually help their teams become successful, they're the ones who are great leaders even if there isn't a line on the org chart. And that's because they know what it means to be a good leader. So leaders come in all different flavors, whether you're managing people or not, and sometimes the manager or the boss isn't a good leader. So what is a leader? A leader is someone who motivates, guides, or influences others. A leader is someone who inspires other people to move towards a better vision of the future. I want to share a quote with you. The leader's singular job is to get results. Daniel Goleman is a psychologist who writes about emotional intelligence, and I like this quote because it pretty succinctly sums up the goal of leadership. Get results. Who doesn't want to get results? It's a pretty good starting point, but there's another one I want to share. Leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. Simon Sinek's definition of leadership really resonates with me because I think it captures the transition we have to make when we become leaders. We have to transition from caring about the work directly to caring about the people who do the work. And it's really hard. A lot of times what happens in tech is that we get really, really good at our jobs, and at some point, after a few years, you get promoted to manager. And this happens all the time. There's a really good developer on the team who's been there for a while, and when we need a manager for that team, we promote them. So now you've been promoted to manager, and that's really cool. Well, now what? At most companies, nobody's beating down your door to give you leadership training. You've just suddenly expected to get results out of these people who maybe used to be your peers. The stress level is off the charts. It's not like you can just start bossing your friends around. How are you supposed to motivate them to do stuff? So sometimes what happens in these situations is the new manager starts micromanaging. They got promoted because they're really good at what they do. They know exactly how to do the work. They know exactly how to do it well, but as we all know, nobody is feeling particularly inspired by a micromanager. And there are a whole bunch of traps like micromanaging when we become managers. And I say traps because they trap us into being stuck as managers without being able to grow into leaders. To transition from being managers to being leaders, we got to let go of the day-to-day work. We have to stop thinking about how every single line of code is written or how every email is worded or how the content of every conversation. We have to stay laser focused on two things, results and people. And the trickiest part about focusing on results and people is that we cannot just make the people get results. I mean, if we could do that, we wouldn't need leaders. We got to inspire and motivate these people to get results. And we can do that by becoming more empathetic. So let's talk about the science behind empathy. Times are changing, y'all. We have weathered the COVID pandemic and social unrest in the United States, and now we're in the midst of the Great Resignation. People are not content to stay in bad jobs with bad bosses. They're quitting their jobs in droves, and it's not just to get higher pay. People want a workplace that cares about them. They want flexibility. They want to stop feeling so burnt out all the time. They want to work somewhere that acknowledges who they are as people, that sometimes stuff outside work sucks, and that while the current sprint is totally important, there are also other important things in their lives. In the midst of all that, this really cool study came out by Catalyst in 2021. They surveyed nearly 900 U.S. employees working across industries to understand the effects of empathetic leadership on their experiences at work. And what they found is that empathy is not a nice to have anymore. It's a strategic imperative. Here's what they found. Empathy boosts innovation. So we sometimes think about innovation as some kind of inborn talent, like Steve Jobs was just born naturally innovative. But in reality, engagement and emotional investment play a huge role in how creative we are. Catalyst found that employees with highly empathetic senior leaders and managers report being much more creative and engaged than those with less empathetic leaders and senior managers. Empathy decreases feelings of burnout. Anybody who's ever experienced burnout knows how much it sucks. Especially with the pandemic, people were really feeling pushed to their limits. In the Catalyst study, 60% of respondents reported that they were feeling burnout. Burnout is a big limiting factor when it comes to productivity. Employees struggle and they feel burnt out. They struggle to get their job done because they're feeling so frustrated or emotionally exhausted or just worn out. Workplace burnout is actually so profound that it's been included in the International Classification of Diseases by the World Health Organization. So Catalyst found that employees are less likely to report feelings of burnout when we have empathetic managers and senior leaders. And this finding was particularly prevalent among women, and especially among women of color. Teams with empathetic leaders perform better. Catalyst isn't the only group that's studying empathy. A 2011 white paper by the Center for Creative Leadership found that no matter the power dynamics in a given country's culture, in all cases, higher empathy among leaders was correlated with higher performance on their teams. In this study, the empathy was measured by directly asking the teams how empathetic their managers were. In every case, the teams who reported that their leaders were more empathetic performed better. Back in the 90s, Harvard psychologist David McClellan found something similar. When he was researching a global food and beverage company, he found that when senior leaders had a high amount of emotional intelligence, their divisions outperformed yearly earnings by nearly 20%. Meanwhile, divisions whose managers lacked emotional intelligence underperformed by 20%. Another really fun finding from the McClellan study is that of the managers who ranked highest on emotional intelligence traits, 87% of them ranked in the top third for annual salary bonuses. So how does this happen? How is empathy creating all of this workplace magic? Well, when people feel like they're supported, they're happier. And when they're happier, they perform better. And I'm not talking about supported in the sense that they've got the tools to do their job. They do totally need that. I'm talking about emotionally supported. Somebody cares about them and is there for them. Somebody knows what they're going through and is concerned for their well-being. Their life matters and their work matters. Empathy also creates psychological safety at work so people can bring up problems. Bringing up problems means that we can solve the problems. If we don't feel like we're psychologically safe at work, we won't bring up problems. They will never get fixed, and then we get burned out. So think about it. Let's say you've got a manager at work who yells at people every time something goes wrong. This manager wants to see butts in seats, and they will make everybody stay until they'll stay late until they get the slightest issue resolved. So your kid has a baseball game tonight. You just found a huge blocker in the ticket that you're working. You gonna tell that manager about it? Maybe not. So let's use another example. Let's say your code's been kind of buggy for the last few weeks, and that manager calls you into their office and they said, hey, your code's been pretty buggy lately. Get it together by next week or you're gone. Well, do you feel inspired to do your best work right now? No, you probably feel pretty bad. Whatever's going on that's leading to the buggy code isn't going to get fixed in this situation. There is no support here. Let's say you got an empathetic leader on your team. Leader calls you into their office and they say, hey, your code quality hasn't been as high as it usually is lately. Is everything okay? What's going on? How can I help? Well, this leader just opened the door to talk to you about what's going on, and they want to help you. They hear you. Maybe you leave this conversation feeling a little bit better. Maybe they help you with some resources, or they talk to you about taking some time off, or they connect you with someone who can help. Maybe they fix the problem if it's in their control. I think it's pretty obvious which of these conversations is going to lead to better outcomes for both the employee and the employer. When we lead with empathy, we get better insight into problems with the team or organization. We can actually resolve the problems in a more collaborative way, and we can make sure that our teams are happy, healthy, and productive. So how can you do it? How can you become a more empathetic leader? Well, now that we know why it's so important, let's talk about how to do it. Step 1, look inward. This might sound kind of counterintuitive, right? We're here to talk about empathy for other people. Shouldn't we start by looking outward? Well, the truth is that just like we can't pour from an empty cup, we can't be more empathetic without examining our own actions. Building self-awareness of ourselves is critical to cultivating an empathetic environment. And here's what I mean by that. When your team is interacting with you, they pick up on the slightest, smallest unconscious behaviors. So think about when you're talking to someone and they're glancing at their watch, they're sighing, maybe they're tapping their foot, they're checking their email, they get a phone call and they just take it and interrupt your conversation. Well, these are all signs that they don't care about you. They're not interested in your conversation. And for people on your team, these are signs that you don't value them. So when I say self-awareness, what I mean is to really reflect on how many cues you're giving your team that you're not interested in them. And I mean be hyper aware of this. Really try to eliminate as many of these behaviors as possible so you can give people your full attention. Especially when you go into a meeting with your team, your attention should be totally focused on the person that you're talking to. If you're in person, put your laptop and phone away. If you're on Zoom, close your email and Slack so you can minimize the distractions. Sit still and make eye contact. I like to take notes when I'm in these meetings so that I can focus my attention even more and I can always come back to it. And a bonus here is that as you become more self-aware, you'll also be modeling behavior to your team so that they can also develop self-awareness. Step 2, check your bias. So now that we're already looking inward at ourselves, we need to check our biases. Sometimes we're rushing around and we're so busy that we arrive to the meeting and we're distracted and we're anxious, and that can cause our team meetings to become stressful or full of conflict. So before you go into any meeting with your team, stop, take a moment to clear your head, take a deep breath. Don't go into the conversation with any preconceived judgments about the situation or assumptions why somebody took some, action that they did in the past. Really try to detach yourself from being reactive to situations. And this is going to let you be a better listener, to connect better, and to focus on the bigger goals. Step 3, start listening. So now that you've got yourself sorted out, you can start listening to other people. Anytime that you talk with your team, they should be talking more than you. This is how you know you're really listening. This is your chance to start learning about other people. Ask them how they're doing. And this is important. You have to really genuinely care. And I mean this literally. Learn about their spouse, their kids, their cat, their favorite movie, where they live, what they like, how they drink their coffee, their favorite cocktail. It is easier to empathize with someone and care about them if you really know them. So get to know them. They don't have to be your BFF, but you should know more about the people on your team than Janie's good at Rails and Franklin contributes to open source code projects. If you start really listening and getting to know people, you can start learning things like, Janie's really hard on herself at work sometimes. Franklin does his best work when he's helping other people. This is going to help you have better conversations with people, and as your relationship develops, it'll help you know how you can support them best. So while you're listening, you also want to remind people that you care. People don't know how you're feeling. They're not psychic. They don't know that you want to help them. They might have had some bad experiences with a bad leader in the past, and that might make them feel reluctant to open up. Let them know you're there for them. Step 4, ask the right questions. When you really start listening, you're going to need to ask people questions so that you can deepen your understanding. And there's an art to asking great questions that can get your team to really open up. Asking great questions can help you open discussions and understand the team. They can help you communicate in a way that the other person is most comfortable. They can help you explore a path forward or innovate new ideas. They can help you remove your biases and judgments or improve your team's alignment. And they can even help your team to feel more empowered by finding their own solutions instead of you just giving all the directions. More on that later. So a lot of times when we're being leaders, it's easy to ask questions that are loaded with our own assumptions and judgments. Sometimes when we ask questions, we're really giving our opinion on something. So think about somebody asking the question, you're not really going to do it like that, are you? Well, that's not a question. What that person is saying is, I don't like that. Don't do it that way. Really think about the questions that you want to ask and how you want to word them. And when you're thinking about the questions that you want to ask, I want you to remove the word why from your vocabulary. Hot take. Why not why? Well, because why can feel like you're accusing the person or blaming them. It activates their defenses and they start making excuses, and that's not going to get anybody anywhere. So think about what happens when you ask somebody, why didn't you test that before it went to production? Well, you're probably not going to get a good answer out of that. Plus, you just freaked that person out. So let's try to reframe that question. What stood in the way of getting that tested before it went to production? Now you've got a chance of getting a good answer, and plus it might be something that you can help with. As I mentioned earlier, you can also use questions to help your team feel more empowered. A lot of times when we ask people questions, we're really telling them what to do. So if we ask something like, well, shouldn't you run that by the design team before you release it? It's not a question. We're telling them that we want them to run it by the design team before they release it. A better way to ask is to broaden those questions and actually learn what they do so we can understand their process, how they work, and how we can help. What communication processes do you usually follow before a release? My absolute favorite empowering question to ask when someone comes to you with a problem is this. If everything was exactly how you'd like it to be, what would be different than it is today? The beauty of this question is that it helps the person be more optimistic about the situation, and it helps them find their own solutions. They'll feel more ownership of the outcomes. So you try it out. You'll see why I call it the magic question. So as you're asking these questions, don't forget to ask follow-up questions to make sure that you understand. When people come to you with a complicated problem, you might need to ask several questions building on top of each other to get to your good solution. And if you're listening carefully, you'll get a lot of information about that person's motivations and behaviors as you ask those questions. Last step, 5, create psychological safety. When people start opening up to you and answering your questions, inevitably someone is going to come to you about a problem. They might even tell you about a mistake that they made. What do you think is going to happen if you start yelling at the person or you take over their work? It's going to be pretty bad. They're going to feel awful. Situation's going to escalate, and it's not going to get resolved. It's just not. And worse than that, this person's probably not going to tell you the next time that they have a problem. They might even start hiding mistakes from you. So you have to create a safe space for mistakes. When something goes wrong, let the person try again. If they're not sure what to do, help them, guide them. If they need help, listen, and then help them. When you lead with empathy, people will open up to you and proactively bring problems to you. You'll have better insight into those problems, and because you have the insight, you can find better ways to solve the problems. Empathy with accountability. So, empathy can make your team feel warm and fuzzy. It can make everybody feel good. But that doesn't mean that empathetic leaders just let things slide or they approve of every behavior. No. Sometimes when I talk about empathy to people, they get like really defensive, and they'll start kind of bristling up, and they'll say, well, how am I supposed to hold people accountable? Well, the truth is that empathy and accountability are not mutually exclusive. You can empathize with someone, and you can also hold them accountable. You can empathize with someone, and you can also talk to them about their performance. And you can even empathize with someone and take disciplinary action. Empathy doesn't mean that when someone on your team is performing poorly, you just let it go. No one's out here saying, oh my gosh, so sorry that you had a bad day. Don't worry about taking down production. Sorry to bother you. Don't do that, y'all. Empathy means that you're concerned about the human being that you're talking to above their personal productive output. But that doesn't mean that productivity doesn't matter. Of course it matters. We're trying to run some businesses here. So you can build accountability into your team alongside empathetic leadership. And look, accountability is hard, but it's not impossible, and you can get there. First step is you gotta build a strong relationship with your team. Everybody needs to know each other in order to trust each other. You've got to start with a good foundation of psychological safety, and to do that, you need to have a good relationship with everybody. People on your team need to know how you'll react to things so they know they can trust you. And you need to know how people on your team will react to things so that you can handle problems more effectively. So when you're building these really strong, solid relationships, make sure that the people on your team feel valued. When people feel valued, they'll feel motivated to do their best and deliver. If they know you care about them, they'll also care about you, and they'll want to do their best work. The most important part of building accountability is setting clear expectations. Setting expectations is so much more effective when it's built on that solid foundation of trust. And this means that you're setting expectations about the work that needs to be done, but you're also setting expectations about when disciplinary actions will happen and why. Only when you've built up all of those steps can you have real, effective, and empathetic leadership. I want to show you a couple of examples of what empathetic leadership looks like and what it doesn't, while holding people accountable and getting results. So one of the ways that I've seen leaders fail over and over and over in my career is by not having hard conversations. They're not called hard conversations because they're like really easy. Nobody is dying to jump into these conversations, okay? But the more that you put it off, the way worse it's going to get for everybody. So the situation that I see happen all of the time is where somebody's underperforming in their current role, and it could be happening for any reason. Maybe they're not ready for the role, or maybe they don't have the tools that they need, or maybe their dog died. There are all kinds of different reasons why this happens, but sometimes it happens. Somebody's not performing well. Their job's not getting done, the deadlines are getting missed, and things are going off the rails. So some leaders at this point just drag that person into their office and they tell them they just need to get it together or else. Well, that's not going to go anywhere. I'm not even going to go into all the ways that that's not going to work. Another way that this goes wrong is when really kind and sensitive leaders just sort of don't do anything about it. They let things go. They think, well, he'll figure it out. Sometimes they tell the person that they're underperforming, and then they really gently suggest that maybe, if possible, if it's not too much trouble, that they could do a little bit better. If it's not a lot of trouble. But then they do a whole lot of hand-wringing behind the scenes, right? It's stressful. So while this manager is getting increasingly stressed about it, well, so is the rest of the team. The project's starting to fall behind. Maybe it's causing the team's work to fall behind. So they're starting to get mad at this person who's underperforming. And do you think that all of this is making the underperforming person feel any better about the situation? No, they feel worse. They know they're underperforming. Their managers brought it up to them, and now their coworkers are mad at them. So things just kind of escalate and they snowball, and then it becomes unbearable, right? At this point, something has to be done. So the person sometimes ends up getting fired anyway, but not until weeks or months of escalation, not until it becomes a crisis and everybody's impacted. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this happens all the time. I have seen this happen in situations where it got to the point where the projects were so bad, they were costing the company money. I've seen it happen in situations where the underperforming person cried at their desk every single day for years. This is not a kinder way of handling things. This isn't gentle or empathetic for anyone involved. Being empathetic doesn't mean that we withhold the truth, but there's a better way. If you've put in the work to build the relationships, build the foundation of trust, and set the clear expectations, you can manage this so much more effectively. I need you to let go of the discomfort of talking to somebody about their performance. Because if you're really empathetic, if you care about that person and you've built a trusting relationship with them, you can tell them the truth with kindness. And here's what that looks like in practice. First of all, when this happens, because you've built the foundation of trust and the good relationship, you know what's going on. Ideally, you know because the person's come and proactively talked to you about it, because they're not scared to. But if they haven't, you're still the type of manager who cares about their team and you know what they're experiencing, so you're hopefully already aware. So when it comes up, you talk to the person. You talk to the person right away. Do not put this off. It is going to feel weird, but the longer you put it off, the weirder it's going to get. So do your future self a favor right now and just do the thing. When you talk to this person, you're going to empathize with them. You're going to seek to understand. Don't walk into this conversation like a cowboy, guns blazing. You're going to say, hey, I noticed you didn't close any tickets last sprint. What's going on? Is everything okay? Want to help? And now you're going to stop talking. Stop. Zip it. Do not say another word. You're here to listen. And as they talk and as you're listening, I want you to empathize with them. Really try to understand what is going on and what's standing in their way. Because listen, nobody wants to do a bad job at work. People naturally want to do things well. Even if it seems like somebody wants to do a bad job at work, and even if they are literally telling you to your face that they want to do a bad job, they don't. Something else is going on. Find out. Listen. And then after you listen, ask questions. Try to learn more. Find out what this person needs to help them. And it could be that they need a mentor, or they just need to ask one question to the right person. It could be that the processes your company has in place are holding them back. And it might not even be work-related. It might be that their dog died. They might just need to take some time off to grieve. So now that you've listened and empathized and you understand what's going on, you got to help them with whatever it is that they need. Remember what Simon Sinek said, leadership is not about being in charge. Leadership is about taking care of those in your charge. This is your responsibility as a leader, and it's huge. You got to help this person with whatever is going on. Get them the resources that they need, or the training. Get them to talk to this one person that they can't catch. Get them the time off, whatever it is. And remember that this is an investment in your relationship, because the more you help this person, the more likely they'll be to come to you in the future. So they walk out of your office and they've got some kind of action plan or some resources, but you are not done. No, you have to follow up now. And I am not talking about following up with some kind of impersonal Slack message at 8 a.m. like a week from now that says, hey, you're going to close some tickets now? No, you got to follow up because you care. You are not done empathizing yet. Ask this person, how are you feeling? Did that get you what you needed? Is there anything else I can do for you? Let them know that you're there for them because you care about them as a person. This is not about the numbers at this point. You're doing this because you think they're a valuable person. You want to help. Forget the numbers. This is going to go a couple different ways, right? In the happy path, people are going to accept the help. You're going to work together. Things get resolved. Everybody feels good. Happy path is way more likely when you've built solid and trusting relationships with that person. But sometimes the person gets kind of defensive. They insist that nothing's wrong. They refuse your help. And this is really, really hard. When this happens, you have to accept that you can do the best that you can, but if somebody doesn't want help, you can't help them. And that's part of empathy too. Understanding that somebody doesn't want help sometimes. And you can keep trying. Do keep trying. Keep telling them that you care. But you have to meet people where they are. And in this case, you keep trying to help, but also make sure that they have a really crystal clear understanding of any work-related consequences. Not, hey, get this together or else. I mean specific. We have to close some tickets this sprint, or we'll need to do a performance improvement plan. I want to make this happen because I care about you. What would stand in your way? So what happens if things don't get better? Well, you could fire the person. That sucks. Nobody likes to do that. A lot of us have had to fire somebody and nobody ever feels good about it. If somebody feels good about it, they should not be a leader. So let me suggest a maybe kind of radical way to do this, and it's not always possible within your company structure, but if there's any possible way within your organization or department, I highly recommend changing up this person's responsibilities. And what I mean by this is that if somebody's not performing well in their current role, it's okay to recognize that a role is not a good fit for somebody. Don't try to put a round peg in a square hole. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad person or they're somehow inferior. It just that means that you, as the leader, have not created a space for that person to be successful. One of my favorite authors is Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Buddhist monk. And he talks about how when you plant lettuce and it doesn't grow well, you don't blame the lettuce. You look into what's going on. You find out why it's not growing well. Maybe there's not enough sun, or there's some problems with watering, or the soil's not just right. But when we have problems with another person, a lot of times we jump to just blame the other person. Well, I think that leadership is a lot like gardening this way. If we know how to take care of other people, they'll grow well, just like the lettuce. And there really isn't a place for blame here. Try to find the right conditions for your team to grow successfully. And if possible, change the person's role in a way that they can thrive and be successful. Move responsibilities around within your team. Let people do the things that they're good at. And this is going to take some creativity on your part. Letting people know that you're restructuring the role might also be a really hard conversation. I did this one time, and the person cried. Like, they ugly cried. A lot. It's like a whole box of tissues. This person thought that they were getting a demotion. Well, the truth about that situation was that they weren't getting a demotion at all. They were getting more responsibility and more visibility in the organization. The reason that conversation was hard is because we've been conditioned by unempathetic systems to think that if we haven't been performing our best, any kind of role change is a bad thing. And it doesn't have to be. Once we got past those feelings, this person shined in their new role. They started being happy with their work. They were more engaged. They were more productive. They started coming up with some wildly creative and innovative solutions to problems that we'd had for a long time. They did outstanding work, and they absolutely obliterated their new performance goals. And within a few years, they started getting raises, promotions, and even more responsibility. So it can be hard to convince your own managers to take the chance, but if you can get creative and do it, it's a really powerful way to get a huge win for everybody. And that's really the essence of what I want you to learn today. That empathy means that you value the human being standing in front of you over everything else. You want to help them to shine at their work. Something I often say to the people on my team is that I care about you as a person over everything else. When you really, truly care about the people, I promise you that the performance will come. The productivity will happen. And it's going to be so, so powerful. Thanks.